I worked in advertising. I think 5 years into it, I've kind of known that I've always wanted to work for myself. And I think my way of expressing my want to work for myself was side projects. And back then, I truly did it out of the need and want to create things that I fully own. I see my work as art. And even if you're an accountant and you work on Excel sheets, your Excel sheets are your pieces of art. When I lived in New York, I did a ton of different side projects, from brunch series, did a series at WeWork where I paired a marketer with a entrepreneur. It was called Strategy Chat. And then I did a podcast, which is the old version of 5 to 9, which is all about side projects. It was very meta. I did a ton of different things. And I also created ultimately Strategist, which is what Space to Grow is now. All of those things back then I did just out of a want to create.
Welcome to Finding Your Groove. If you're living and working in a way that's in sync with who you are or you want to be, then you're in the right place. Each episode, we swap stories with guests who have found out that the traditional path isn't set up for people like us. The podcast was created to help listeners like you feel less alone on this journey. Through stories and being in community with each other, we can avoid burnout and inspire each other to keep going. I'm Josh Green.
And I'm Taylor Harrington. And to kick off the pod, we chatted with our friend Tina Yip. In this conversation, she shares how working remotely in Hawaii and getting her green card were two big moments that propelled her into designing a life more in sync with who she is. Tina is a coach and the creator of Space to Grow, helping creative humans make their work and life more intentional, meaningful, and expansive. She has been featured in Randy Zuckerberg's book, Pick 3, Campaign US, Adweek, Youth Marketing Summit, Wethos, Pattern Brands, and more. She's all about designing intentional spaces for folks to feel, connect, and learn. Tina, let's go ahead and dive right in. We are getting started with our show and tell to kick things off and land at present day. So would love to know, what did you bring today that represents you living life your way?
So what I've brought today is actually what I'm wearing, my Hawaiian shirt. I actually have a collection of really awesome Hawaiian shirts, and this is meaningful to me, especially related to my work life and my work and my life in general, because I took a trip to Hawaii in the middle of the pandemic. And while I was there, it was a very impactful trip where I was like feeling some sort of way about my full-time job. I was already kind of feeling like I wanted something else. And during that trip, I worked from 6 a.m. to 12 p.m. And that blew my mind around. That can be like a new way of working. And at the same time, I also read 3 books that changed my life. And I read all of them kind of like right after another. One was Can't Even, Why is the Millennial Generation the Burnout Generation by Anne Helen Peterson. This Could Be Our Future by, he was the co-founder of Kickstarter, Yancey Strickler. And then 4 Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. And reading those books back to back, just like kind of a lot of commentary about capitalism, a lot of commentary about work culture. And clearly, Tim Ferriss, like, he made this kind of way of living. And he wrote the book in a way, in such a de facto way of like, you can create a work life that is totally different. And all of that blew my mind. And I just also like absolutely love Hawaii. And I've also like been the kind of person who love colors. And so now I just like wear a lot of Hawaiian shirts. And I think that it really kind of is a signifier of the beginning of this work-life journey that I'm on right now.
Wow, that is so good. I would love if you can like just detail what exactly is going on your shirt for any of the listeners that don't have the ability to see it right now. Like, let's get those colors going. What are those little images?
So I'm pretty picky about the Hawaiian shirts that I purchase because I don't want it to be like the very classic ones. So I love ones that is kind of different. So this one here is like, there's like white curvy stripes. There's like an island that's green. Most of the shirt is in this like bright blue. There is some flowers. Some are pink and some are orange. And that's and there's like boats on it too. And I just also love the color combination and the color palette on this specific Hawaiian shirt. I think this one is the one that's my favorite in my collection. So I whipped out my favorite one for this.
Do you remember your first Hawaiian shirt?
Oh my God, my first one? That's a really good question. I'm looking in my closet.
What,
Um,
what an honor that you were your favorite for this episode.
yeah, I think my first one might have been one that's really, really bright orange.
Mm.
And yeah, it's like mostly bright orange, and there's like some islands on it because it's a Hawaiian shirt.
What a good conversation starter. Like clothes are really I feel like clothes really open the door for such a conversation. And when you're wearing a bright orange, bright blue, fun Hawaiian shirt, I'm sure that so many fun conversations have come from that. I also love that you've already dropped like 3 book recs at the beginning of this. And one of the things that Josh
Always.
and I we talk about a lot are work hours, working with teammates that are on the other side of the world. It's always kind of funny to think about like what hours are our most creative hours? Which ones do we feel like we have to be online or are more
Mm,
productive to be online? I'm in a Slack group called the Community, and it's full of a ton of community managers. And
mm.
they do this thing that's like an asynchronous happy hour in Slack every week. And one of the questions someone asked there recently was if you could pick your ideal work hours, which would you pick? And I thought it was such an interesting question because similar to what you said, there's something nice about that like early morning, like I'm done with work by noon and then can go off and enjoy the rest of my day. But at the same time, there's something kind of funny for me about, well, it depends on when my friends are working. Like if the whole world is working 9 to 5, then do I want to work 9 to 5 so that the social time happens at those other times? It's an interesting question. So I'm curious now that you're back in the US, you're in Denver, like what are your working hours today look like? Have you still leaned on that more non-traditional structure?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually also think, as you were describing that, knowing which hours you work best also comes with a sense of self awareness and understanding yourself and how you work. Well, the first thing I do is always my morning routine in the morning. It takes me an hour. So my morning routine includes journaling, 3 pages. What is the term? The artist way term, the morning pages for 3 pages, stream of consciousness writing. Then I pull a card from this Oracle deck that I love called The Journey. Shout out to Allison Felice who made it. I pull from it every single morning. And today I actually pulled a card called The Inner Child. And it comes with a prompt. So I would use the prompt as kind of like my grounding thought for the day. It could also like mean anything, and whatever is real to me that day, I would write it down, and then I would set 3 priorities for the day that I have to complete. Um, and then there's also a list of other things that I usually like to do, includes like tracking my weight or looking at my budgets and all these like smaller things, and also meditate for usually 10 minutes. And then after that, I read for around 20 minutes. And it's a game changer to have created this morning routine for myself because I just really truly found that I'm much more grounded when I do my morning routines. Like there are times when, I would pick up the phone first thing in the morning and then my brain just kind of like goes somewhere else, or I don't do the morning routine. It's just like I see the difference in my emotions and how I react to things and my day to day in general. So having that morning routine is a game changer. So just starting off there, but then going back to your original question, I think my most creative, productive hours is like right after the morning routine and right after like reading. So around like 10 to 12, I usually prioritize some of the more creative work that I need to like use my brain power on. And I don't take any calls like before lunch too. My lunch usually is at 12. I don't take any calls usually. And then I start taking calls after lunch and doing like some other work after lunch, depending on what I need to do. And sometimes like when I have my energy also like ebbs and flows sometimes. So if one day I decide I want to work less in certain hours, I would maybe like work in the weekends or like work at night, whatever it is. So like it's a combination of having structure, but also being fluid about it and being open about how I use it too.
For me, I want to just go back to your morning routine because I find, and I want to know for myself, but I'm sure loads of listeners here, and I always see people suggesting like, oh, this is the ideal morning routine. You should just do this every day and you'll see the difference in your life. What have you done that's actually helped you sustain having that practice over time? Because I have morning routines and I'm like, something throws me out. I go on vacation, I come back, and it's really hard to get back into those flows. Like, what have you found been helpful to keep that as a long-term practice?
I think for me, I mean, morning routine is such a personal thing. Like, there's not one activity that you must do that works for everybody. I think for me, it's like seeing the difference in myself and how I show up in the day after the morning routine. And even during the morning routine, like, I feel really good doing it. I love having that space to journal, to meditate. And I think, like, I used to be the kind of person who's very, like, when I did the artist way and learned about morning pages, there was actually a lot of resistance in me of thinking like, I'm never gonna sustain writing morning pages every single morning. That was like a big thing for me. But then I think the framing in the artist way, where she talks about how morning pages is about like dumping all of your insecurities, all the things that you carried with you through the night or the day before, and just like dumping all of it, processing all the things that you haven't processed from the day before, and just having all of it in these 3 pages, and starting your day fresh. And that framing really helped me understand, okay, what these pages are for. And I really see a difference in myself and I feel really good. So I think realizing that has made me keep going. I don't see it as like, it's not like a discipline thing. It's like, I feel good doing it, so I'm going to keep doing it.
I also followed the artist way now a couple of years ago, and did my morning pages. And it's funny because I'm so not a morning person. So I think I also get into this trap of like, how do I use that time effectively while also recognizing that my brain is just like more lit up at night. And so sometimes I turn them into like night pages instead of morning pages. Yeah. And I really like doing them at night because, similar to what you said, there was something so relieving about being like, what do I want to leave in today? Like, what do I want to put on the page and leave in today and not bring into tomorrow? And that also helped me sleep better because I wasn't sitting in bed thinking about certain things. And I've heard so many people talk about like morning pages, and the artist way has helped them along the way. To be honest, I didn't even finish the whole thing, but I felt comfortable opening a journal. When I started doing morning pages, I don't know that I knew what I needed out of it, but what I actually found from it was the fact that I know how to write in a journal now and dump my heart and brain like onto the pages. And now, like 2+ years later, I feel so comfortable in a moment when I am feeling overwhelmed, or to start the day fresh and like hit pause on, okay, what is it that I'm bringing in from tomorrow that I don't want to bring in? And even though it's not a part of my daily routine at this point, it is something that I lean on in those moments. And I think that's what's so important, is like figuring out what are those things in your toolbox and letting go of like, actually, maybe this isn't one of those things I need to do every day, but it's something that I know I can lean on in the moments when I need it.
Yeah, I also have a night routine. I love the things because I started doing that also because I started sleeping not that good, and then I wanted to improve my sleep. And what you said about dumping certain things before you go to bed so you go to bed fresh is also very helpful. Like for me, my night journaling is more about gratitude and more about kind of like what I'm grateful for. And that has definitely also helped me with my sleep too.
I think it's really cool to hear I think often people don't realize or don't give space to reflect on the power of these practices. Because I hearing what you were sharing about maintaining the practice of, well, there's a really positive feedback loop because I see the benefits in my life. Like I feel there's even something that has to be intentional in that you're like, oh, I'm giving space to know that this is good for me. And to feel that this is good for me and to reinforce that, because I know in my own meditation practice that also at the beginning, I was like starting and not feeling that feedback loop of, oh, this is just hard. And then you get far enough into it, and that resonated so deeply of when I miss a day, I feel the difference, because you leveraging that dissonance of like, oh, I could be here, but I'm here, always helped me get back into my flow.
Yeah, I think also maybe reframing these practices in a more gentle way of like practices to return to, instead of like, these are the things I have to do every single day. Because even when Taylor was talking about, you feel guilty when you don't do it, or you like beat yourself up, it's okay. Like things happen, life happens, our priorities change. Or also, you can stick with it for a certain amount of days and then go back to thinking, okay, is this actually supporting me? Is this helping me? How do I feel about it? So that it doesn't feel like this very disciplinary thing that I have to do, because you're doing all of these things in your own time. So just make it enjoyable and make it something that actually works for you.
I want to jump back to your Hawaiian shirts for a second, because when you were sharing about your Hawaiian shirts, you said that they sort of reflect this moment, like this shift in your life. Hawaii was clearly this inflection point, or it sounds like already.
Yeah.
And the rest of the show, we're going to talk a lot about what's happened after you started wearing Hawaiian shirts. But it'd be really nice to just drop in a little bit to what was it before you wore Hawaiian shirts? Who was Tina, and what was this world that you were living in? And, I think the themes of these shows that we're exploring are to be in a world where you don't wear Hawaiian shirts. And what did that look like? And love to hear a bit about your reality, and also noticing the tension of why did it feel like you really needed Hawaiian shirts?
Wow.
So yeah, the pre-Hawaiian shirts world. Love to come into that with you.
How poetic. I think Hawaiian shirts have always been inside of my heart. They've always been there. I mean, quite literally, if it's just my outfit, my fit choices, I've always been drawn to wearing a lot of colors, and and my outfits has always been a creative expression for myself. If we were to go actually literally back to pre-Hawaiian shirts day, I worked in advertising for a decade. And I think I've always known, I think 5 years into it, I've kind of known that I wanted kind of something else, that I've always kind of wanted to work for myself. But it's always been something that it's in the back of my head, because I'm from Hong Kong, born and raised, and I needed a visa to work in the US. So I needed a company to sponsor my visa. So it's always been this thing where I'm like, oh, but I need the sponsorship. So I need to be tied to a large company that would sponsor my visa. And I think my way of expressing my want to work for myself was side projects back then. I had a ton of different side projects. And back then I truly did it out of the need and want to creatively express myself through the things that I make, create things that I fully own. I see my work as my art, and I see my life as art. And it doesn't matter, I see you guys building Groove. It's this is your art. And even if you're an accountant and you work on Excel sheets, your Excel sheets are your pieces of art because you put your stamp on it. And so I've always viewed my work as my art. And so I've always had this want to just create things. So when I lived in New York, I did a ton of different side projects, from, brunch series to I did a series at WeWork where I paired a marketer with a entrepreneur. It was called Strategy Chat. And then I did a podcast, which is the old version of 5 to 9, which is all about side projects. It was very meta. I did a ton of different things. And I also created ultimately Strategist, which is what Space to Grow is now. So all of those things back then I did just out of a want to create. And little did I know that those things would lead to what I do now, which is Space to Grow, my company, and my coaching work.
I would love to hear this want to create. How far back can we go with that? Was there something in childhood where you felt that need so deeply? I guess I'm just thinking about, in my experience, even in school, Josh and I were having a conversation about this yesterday, how at such a young age, I cared so deeply about art and doing things differently. And I'm curious if you felt that too, if the school system that you were a part of allowed you to be that creative person in the classroom, or if you found that outside and what that might have looked like.
Yeah, I remember, I think maybe I was around 9 years old. My dad's friend made a comment about me and my sister. She was like, if there was a box, your sister would just be in the box and Tina would go outside the box and do her own thing. And back then, I remember when she said that, I was like, kind of confused. I didn't know whether I should be a little bit offended too, because like in growing up in Asia, in Hong Kong, like the culture is to be a good girl, to maintain in the box, and to follow rules. And I also have no idea what sort of behaviors I exhibited for her to say that, because I was like pretty young back then. And now thinking that she said that, I was like, wow, she's so perceptive to say that about me. Because I'm like, yeah, I've always had this gravitation of, if people are doing the same things, I would want to do something different. And that's always been kind of a natural thing for me, to be drawn to behave this way. And in terms of kind of how I was brought up, I mean, my mom kind of just allowed me to do anything. Of course, there were certain things such as like grades and achievements that she had many thoughts about, that she wanted me to do. But in terms of like activities and creativity, she kind of just like let me do whatever. So I discovered musical theater when I was maybe like early teens, and I got hooked. I was a theater kid growing up. And in my middle school plus high school, it's called secondary school there. We had a pretty good theater program. And so I was just like the theater kid. I was like the theater kid. I was like the choir girl. I performed a lot. I was like the person who did all those things. And nobody ever said I can't do those things, which I was very, in my family, which I was very grateful for. So I just like did a lot of the things that I just like wanted to do. Like I wanted to take singing classes. And my mom was like, okay, like find one and then we'll support you. So I was very grateful for that I've always just kind of had this thirst to do stuff that I enjoy. And then they supported me doing that.
My friend Bree Lever. Do you know Bree, Tina?
I don't.
Oh my gosh,
I feel like I should know her.
Bree. She actually lives in Hawaii most of the year. Going back to Hawaiian shirts. These have really become a theme for the whole episode. But she writes a newsletter, and every week she shares like gems. And this week it included a tweet that says, you ever meet someone and you can tell immediately that they were heavily involved on campus? And I just thought that was so funny. Like obviously referencing like a high school campus or a college campus, but I think there's something really interesting about this theme of like the types of people who like doing things differently tend to look for those extracurriculars to like satisfy that craving that maybe they're not getting in other parts of their lives. Like just hearing you talk about that involvement in the musical theater side of things is just so cool. I also thought of my friend Dana Ray, who her whole phrase is like she works with people who are unboxable leaders. And I'm like, you are an unboxable leader. Like that is literally what that woman was describing when you were 9 years old, and you still are.
Oh my gosh, I'm so honored. I love that term.
Yeah, it's good.
It's like I did just even we're starting the process of just these things that's coming up to me. It's like it's a theater, but also like with the internet, like I had access to a computer, and so I was like all over Neopets. And back then I was also obsessed with these British bands, specifically S Club 8. I know most people know S Club 7, but then S Club 7, there was a reality show which they created the S Club Juniors. And then when S Club 7 retired, S Club Juniors became S Club 8. And I was obsessed with S Club 8. And I would like be all over these forums just talking about S Club 8. And then through those forums, I learned about graphic design because you had to make banners as your signature. And so I learned, back then it was first Paint Shop Pro. And I think that's not a thing anymore. And then I learned Photoshop to make banners in the S Club 8 forums. And I set up shop in the S Club 8 forum being like, does anybody want banners? I did them for free. And I just like loved making those things on the internet specifically for S Club 8.
Well, so the side hustles really began with S Club 8.
The side hustles really began with S Club 8.
Josh, as a British man yourself, do you know what S Club 8 is?
I'm well aware of S Club 8.
Really?
I don't know if I would ever know one of their songs, though. I probably know S Club 7 songs, but I remember S Club Juniors. And I didn't know that they became S Club 8, if I'm honest.
Yeah, they became S Club 8. And I learned their dances too. And I would do the dances in front of a mirror in my bedroom, and then my sister would hear me like stomping because like when you dance, you like make sound on the ground, and then she'll be like, what are you doing in your room?
That's brilliant. So wait, let's go back to these side hustles. When did the side hustles start to take over? Like, do you remember the moment where you were like, okay, I'm in this world of like full wanting to be fully creative and be myself, and I was in advertising. When did the side hustles start to take up more space? Or was there like an
Yeah.
internal shift inside you? Or did something happen in your world that just was like, oh, I'm going to step into this more?
Yeah, I think even just this conversation is actually making me fully realize this because I haven't thought about this for a hot second. It's like, yeah, like with like setting up shop in the Escalade forums and in college, like when Taylor was talking about being involved in campus, like I was super involved when I was in college on campus. I was like, I spent way more time being the president of my a cappella group and like the VP of PR in my business fraternity. I was in a business fraternity called Alpha Kappa Psi, and then I was just like super involved doing leadership stuff on campus. And also with going back to my story of needing a visa, like I did just the most with needing to build up my internship and my resume throughout college. And I also like kind of knew my strengths and weaknesses because like grades was never really my thing. Like I was like a B plus student, and I just don't see myself like really trying crazy hard and getting to an A. I just like didn't really know that was going to happen. So I was like, fine, I'm a B plus student, but I know that I love this part of, I guess, college slash building on my resume. So I went ham into finding an industry that resonated with me. And back then it was advertising, specifically social media marketing, because that was the hot thing back then. And so I just did the most of like being on Twitter chats slash like Twitter parties. That was like a thing back then. And like interning a crap ton in order to stand out. And that was like the way that I operated for a long time. And then when I finally got a job in New York in my first agency, because I've just like kind of operated this way, I'm like, I still want to do things that's outside of my main thing, which then was like, I guess, my full time job. I still wanted to create things that's like fully mine. And so the thirst of still wanting to create was there. And so I just kept doing it. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it definitely is taking us in the direction. First, I want to just reflect on, it's also so cool to hear how, like the time where I feel like I was in the system more, like I learned how to play that in the way that works for me. Like hearing how you move through it. Oh, I knew I had to hustle here because maybe my academics weren't going to be the thing that got me my first role. So I did these internships. I did this. I did that. It's like, it was like playing the game through Tina's lens. And that's wonderful to hear. And it's cool to hear that it just like couldn't stop. But I definitely want to hear like, when did it start to take up more, when did you decide, okay, cool, I'm not going to be in advertising because the side hustles,
Ooh.
really can really fill my life.
Yeah, I think a very key moment for me, which basically led me to where I am now, working for myself, it was in the pandemic. Of course, like it also comes with the going to Hawaii and all that stuff. And at the same time, also, I was at my recent full-time job, which was at an advertising agency. I was heading up marketing and culture there. And I just increasingly felt a lot of anger and resentment and unhappiness at my job. And honestly though, like nothing was really like wrong about the job. And for someone else it could have been a dream job maybe, because I actually had a really supportive boss. She really cared for me. She gave me a lot of opportunities. She sent me to Cannes Lion, which is like this really glamorous, like the awards get given out there, the top award in the advertising industry. I got to like be on yachts. I saw Sting at a private 100 people concert. It was like this very glamorous thing. And then she also put me in front of all these like senior executives at the holding company, which I guess is a really big deal. And they had really positive things to say about me. And I was just kind of being like, I'm just like, this doesn't feel right to me. I'm just wasn't very excited about it. And it was even more apparent when I had a really close friend who were given very similar opportunities. She was killing it. And her reactions to these opportunities were like she would be like crying and being like, "Oh my god, I worked so hard to be here and I'm so happy that I'm finally being recognized and I'm so happy these people are recognizing me and like this just like is like what I've worked my life for." And I just did not have that reaction. And so I was just like, okay, this is telling me something. And I also, I think, knew pretty early on, maybe like 5 years into my advertising career, that I like wanted something else. I've always felt like there's like something bigger or like something else for me. But back then I would also have these doubts being like, but then like, isn't being a chief strategy officer, isn't being a chief creative officer, or these roles that are put on a pedestal, isn't that the big thing? Like, isn't that what I should want? Isn't that what ambition looks like? And so there was a lot of doubts there. And so fast forwarding, going back to my most confused, like I was very angry, but I was like, why? And so I started working with a coach to unpack a lot of these things, to start thinking about, okay, like if I'm not inspired by that, what am I inspired by? Who are the people that I was inspired by? And very quickly got to a point of like, okay, everyone that has inspired me were creative entrepreneurs. They are people who went rogue and did their own thing. They are chefs that I've watched on Chef's Table telling their stories. They're artists who have really interesting stories. And I'm just like, okay, I think that really crystallized for me. And so I think those things plus getting married, after I got married, I'm like, I'm on this path to green card. And I'm like, I'm not wasting this opportunity. And I'm no longer need to be tied to this full-time job. And it is still scary to be like, I'm going to jump into this thing that I've always wanted to do. But I just knew in my heart that I'm like, I'm not wasting this opportunity that I am getting from this green card, being able to finally not needing to tie myself to a full-time job. And whatever it is I decide to do, I will need to figure it out and make it happen, because I know that's my path.
I just loved that whole story, like every little ounce of that. I think what you said about like, there's something interesting there about an itch. And that's a word that another one of our guests on the podcast mentioned. Like, she just had to scratch an itch. And it's interesting because I'm thinking about that language that she used, but then hearing you share it, it's interesting because like scratching an itch isn't like a fun activity. Like if I had an itch on my arm right now, like I'm not like, oh my God, I cannot wait to scratch this itch. Like that is not the reaction to an itch. Like it's an interesting phrase that we lean on. So I don't have an answer for like what is that phrase that really captures this like ongoing feeling and then finally being able to like lean into it. But there's something there that I know I'm going to want to noodle on that after this episode, is like, what is that? And I'm curious if something comes up for you two on that. And then the other thing is just like, I can relate so much to that feeling of like, almost like secondhand happiness or secondhand love for something. Like when someone else is doing the thing that lights them up, even though it's something that's so not what I would want to do, like seeing a chef or seeing a chef on a show, or like when someone's singing on The Voice, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I just feel this like feeling deep in me that is just so happy that that person is doing the damn thing, whatever the damn thing is for them. And so to see the possibility of other people doing the damn thing is something that has given me permission and like just a boost of energy to go ahead and do that myself. So it's cool to hear that it seems like that's an energy fuel for you as well.
Yeah, with your note about kind of scratching an itch, I think to me, it's like this like guttural, intuitive feeling that you have that has been maybe gnawing at you for however long. And I think for me, it's been gnawing at me for a long time. And perhaps for me, it's like there are logistical reasons. There are, there were things in my strategy career that I did enjoy. I was very interested in culture and learning about and doing things in culture and understanding audience, whatever it is I was doing, there were things that I liked about what I was doing. It wasn't horrible, which actually maybe an even harder place to be at, because when you hate something that you're doing, at least you're like, okay, I need to go. But when you're at this point where you're kind of like, it's okay, it's not bad, it's actually much harder to maybe like leave that and get yourself to do the things that you actually really want to, or maybe even like listen to that guttural feeling of there's something else here, because what's happening now is not bad, it's not horrible, like it's okay. So I think it's like that, listening to that like intuition, it's the intuition that's gnawing at you.
Did either of you ever watch the show Design Star? It was like on HGTV forever.
No, is that like, when did you watch that? Like when was that show?
Young. I don't know. I was probably in middle school. I would like make my brothers watch it with me. They were like really young. I'd be like, boys, come on, we're all getting on the couch and watching it. It's on.
Love it.
But they had this one challenge in every season of it. So they would get a bunch of designers together, and basically it was a competition show where at the end one designer was chosen and they got to like have their own show on HGTV, which was epic because then you could like watch it afterwards. So if you fell in love with the contestant, then you could watch it regularly. Anyways, every time they had a season, the first challenge that they had was called the White Box Challenge. So every single designer was given a white box and they could do whatever they wanted with it to represent themselves. And as you're talking about this like gnawing feeling of like these choices and kind of like knowing that like, oh, there might be another opportunity out there, I'm just thinking of this like plain white box that these designers were given, and almost having like a bunch of doors that are all inside of this box. And like maybe some are creaked open, maybe someone's knocking on one, maybe you've chosen one and you're entering another one of these white boxes with more doors. Like there's something about doors and this knocking that's like really resonating for me visually, where it's like this itch, this gnawing, where like this knock might become louder at certain parts of our life, where it's like, I need to open that door and just see what the hell is behind it and actually take the leap. But maybe before opening that door, it's almost like looking through the peephole. It's going ahead and like opening it like a crack and seeing what's happening over there. And maybe that's part of like those side projects, or taking a peek into like how someone else is experiencing it.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when people think about making a change, whether it is a career or life, there's like this it's all or nothing. I need to go from like, I'm doing this, I need to like then start from zero all over again and just start over. But like, it doesn't have to be like that. You can just kind of start by experimenting with things, doing small things, or planting seeds, having conversations with people with jobs or whatever that they're doing that you're curious about, starting a side project. It doesn't have to be this thing where you're immediately like just opening that door and like jump into that like hole that is the unknown. Like you can just start by experimenting.
I think something that also comes up strongly for me around that is just like, sometimes there's something holding you, like you're saying. I think so many listeners, and I know in my own life, logistical things in our lives often define a lot of stuff. Expectations define like a lot of reasons that you can't just jump through a door are just real. I just became a new parent, or, I can't move out of the city because I'm doing X or Y. And that actually the experimentation I've seen in my own life, the experimentation changes the possibility of all of those external constraints anyway. That you think that you're stuck in this reality, you experiment a bit more, and actually the stuckness in this reality starts to soften as well. So actually my world changes because I started experimenting, and now this is like more possible than it ever was initially. So I just love those like feedback loops that like life can change iteratively in small steps.
Josh, what's an example of that in your life that you've experimented and then decided, oh, this is something I want to pursue for like a longer period of time?
It's funny because it's a personal example that comes up rather than a professional example.
We're here for it.
Yeah, share it. Tell us.
We want to know. We're on the edges of our seats.
I never thought I was going to move to America. I didn't expect to live in the United States. I was like, I'm very English. I'm European. I love Europe. I love England. I was living in Israel. And really, as I started dating my now wife, she kept taking me on trips to the US. Like we'd go to
Mm.
Colorado, would be in upstate New York, would be in Vermont. We'd like be exploring all these like, magical parts of America that I'd never seen. And I didn't think at the end of this process, like, wow, I'm jumping to the US. It really happens in these like increase. It was like quite fixed that I was staying in Israel. Like that was my life. I wasn't leaving. But actually by coming and seeing the possibility of life here in different ways made it possible.
She was planting the seeds.
Yeah. Yes. Well, she was a bit more than
Love it.
planting seeds. She was like, I'm living in America. If you want to marry me, you're coming to America.
Yeah. It's like these small steps to show you the different ways of living here.
Completely. They make you more like malleable and dexterous emotionally and internally, I think, often as much as externally. It's like, oh, this possibility can happen or can come true.
Yeah, I think the takeaway for me for your story is like, you wouldn't, of course, like, I mean, maybe for another conversation, but I'm sure coming from outside of the US, there's definitely thoughts about like what America is like and what living in America is like. Of course, there's like love involved here with your partner, but it's like you then experimenting and actually experiencing being here and experiencing the different ways of living here got you to actually see what it's like to be here. And that could totally be applied to work, to something else in your life where it's like we oftentimes have this idea of like what being this thing is like, or the grass is greener on the other side. The grass is greener if we do this. But if we were to just kind of experiment and actually find out for real and experience and talk to people around what it's really like there, you might find ways, you might find out that this idea that you have about this thing might be different from what it's actually like.
Completely. Completely. Wow. Taylor, I'm wondering where we should take the conversation next. I feel like Tina has so much wisdom about like the next part of the journey.
I know. And I think, Tina, we've had conversations in the past about like when you are carving your own path, when you are doing things differently, it's really, really hard to know when you're doing enough, like personally, professionally, like what is that definition of enough? What is that compass of like, this is where I'm going? And I want to make sure we talk about that on this episode because I feel like it's something that you think about a lot and are actively working on, but also have made a lot of strides in. So I'd love to go there. Like what is coming up for you and how have you started to define what enough looks like for you professionally and maybe even personally? Like I think this is all wrapped up in one life.
Thank you for getting us there, Taylor. I think so. I've been thinking a lot about the idea of enough lately because I'm reading this book called The Psychology of Money. And for that, it's the context of like me being enough versus like how much do you need to have to feel like that's enough. Does that make sense? It's like how much do you own or how much like you've achieved is enough.
Okay.
And that's the part that I've been thinking about. Like still a work.
Can I clarify? Do you mean when you say that, do you mean how much do I need to feel like enough relative to the world around me?
It's like, well, in the book, it's more like how much money do I need to have for it to be enough?
Boom.
Or it's like similar veins of like how much external things do I need for it to be enough? Does that?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, because I don't want to like confuse that idea versus like I am enough, which is a different concept of like, or maybe it's similar. Like, please, like listeners, let us know what you think. But in terms of like having enough, like that's still something that I'm grappling with because I think growing up, my mom had ingrained a lot of ideas about like basically it's like never enough. The idea of being of never enough of like, if you get an A, there's always someone else who gets an A plus. Or like, if you make X amount of money, there's always someone else who makes more. So like you should need to achieve more. So it's like this endless unachievable thing where even if you are a millionaire, there are people who are like have 5 million, 10 million, $100 million. So it's like this idea of grappling with this idea of like what is enough. And honestly, that's something that I'm still thinking about. I think for me, it comes down to a lot of like how you feel. And especially I think for me is like fulfillment, happiness, how much joy I'm feeling. And I think for me, with how I'm operating now, the type of work that I'm doing, how I'm showing up every day, how I'm learning every day to get better at my craft of coaching, how I'm building my business, I just know in my heart and in my gut that I am in the right direction. Of course, there are days, like those thoughts, I'm sure everyone who's listening who work for themselves, like, have this thought of like, oh, it'd be nice to just get a full-time job, and I don't know, you don't have to worry about, when how am I going to make more money and all that stuff. But it's like, sure, I have those thoughts, but I would not trade anything to do what I do now. And at the end of the day, no matter what sort of work you do, it's going to be hard. Whether you're at a full-time job, whether you're an entrepreneur, freelancer, whatever you do, there's going to be hard things. There's going to be ups and downs. So pick the path that is worth it for you. Pick the path that lights you up. Pick the path that truly energizes you and gets you up in the morning and makes you feel excited about the work that you're doing. And I think for me, that's really my compass. And I just remember, I think it was like last year, there was this one day where it was like I was, making good money. I was feeling like, okay, we're no longer making zero. We're no longer just like setting this up. Things are happening. Things are moving along. And I'm like, wow, I'm just so happy with my days. Like, I still have goals that I want to meet. I still have growth goals, whether it is like personal or money wise, whatever it is that I want to keep improving, that I want to keep getting better at. But I am so happy with my journey, and I am so fulfilled every single day with what I'm doing now, because it is so aligned with my values, how I want to show up, my purpose, my North Star, and it just like feels so good every day.
Do you have practices that help you know that? Like, I am like curious, because I'm curious, where do like there's all of these amazing realities and like the compass is clear. Is there like a cadence of reflection? I'm guessing your morning and night routines are really helpful in being aware. I'm curious if there are any other practices that help you ensure that compass is staying true.
I think self-awareness is big here, of always checking in with yourself and trusting what you're feeling. When I was, as I talked about, my old job, there was this gnawing feeling for me every single day, which for a long period of time, I was kind of not listening to it, because I'm like, I kind of have a good thing going. I'm working on pretty interesting things. My boss is supportive of me. It could be it could be a dream job. Like, it could be great. So I just kind of push a lot of that away for a little bit. But I'm quite an emotional person. So when I'm unhappy, or when something doesn't feel right, it is always there. I know that it's there. And something that actually was helpful that I learned from my first coach was actually listing out your values and your non-negotiables that you need in a workplace. So it was like in the context of work. So listing out what are the things that are important to you. So it's like, it could be working with people being surrounded by people that inspire you, collaborating with people that you love, or it could be like, making a true impact in whatever that you care about. So like listing those out and then scoring them from 1 to 5, how you feel, how much that value is actually being met. And I started tracking that every single day. And then it was then apparent to me that a lot of my values were like 2s and 3s, or even like mostly 2s, which was then apparent to me that like, oh, I'm feeling this weird gnawing because my values are not being met, and because I'm not doing the things that I actually want to be doing and showing up the way that I want to. So I think putting pen to paper and really clarifying those things is very helpful if you're at a place of you just like kind of have this like gnawing feeling. And in terms of now, I would say just like always checking in with myself.
I think there was something really cool about what you said a little bit earlier around like going in the right direction and this gut feeling that like you're going in the right direction. And then what you just shared around being in sync. Like I'm in sync with my values. I'm living in a way that is in sync with who I am. It reminds me of in my first job, it was like first couple of months into my first job post college. I was walking with one of my coworkers and he said to me, after you've been at this in this role for several years, you're going to be a totally different person. And I just said, I don't believe that. I just like 22 years old. I'm like, I don't believe you. I don't believe that I'm the kind of person that would like so dramatically change in the next few years because of a role that I would be like so different. And I know that he didn't mean it like, you know, and then he was like, no, I don't mean it like that. Like kind of backing back away from it. But at the same time, I think there's something really interesting around like almost like that collection of experiences over time and that trust in yourself that I don't know exactly where I'm heading next, but I believe in the journey and I trust myself that I'm going to become more and more me in whatever that looks like for me. And that's unique and different for each person. I know that you're really curious about affirmations. I would love to end the episode with like, if you could gift yourself an affirmation right now at where you are in the journey, like what do you need to hear today at this stage on the day of recording, Tina? Like this is the thing that you really need to hear to sustainably keep going on this journey.
I think all these years, what has really was the fuel to my motivation for doing all these things was that I had a very clear North Star that came from a place of like true guttural want. And for some reason, when I was 14 years old and I was visiting my sister at NYU, I just had this guttural feeling that I needed to be in New York City. And that's been me since I was 14. And back then, I mean, I don't know what, maybe it's like the energy of the city. And also there's parts of feeling, we don't need to get into it now, but it's just like feeling not, feeling that I didn't belong and feeling there's something else for me outside of being in Hong Kong that I just knew like New York City was the place for me that I needed to be in. I just like really channeled that. And it was such a pure thing that I wanted to make happen that I just did everything to make it happen and having that North Star. And after I achieved it, actually, during my 20s, like I was actually kind of lost for quite a few years because I achieved that North Star and I didn't know what my next North Star was, / maybe didn't fully realize what it was, because now looking back at some of my journals, some of my reflections when I was like in my early 20s, there was like hints of working for myself and being an entrepreneur. But it was like such an impossible thing back then because I needed that visa that I didn't even entertain that idea really that I had to do that and that I could do that anytime soon. So I think my way of expressing that was through my side projects back then. And then with the next opening in my later 20s was like clarifying, and finally accepting and recognizing and fully acknowledging that, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur. Hey, I want to work for myself. I want to create my own art that's pure, that I want to make this sort of impact in other people, that I want to contribute to the world in this way, that I then crystallized my next North Star. And because it's so clear, and it's clear to me now too, that I will do everything to run towards that North Star and make that happen. And with these North Stars, like, it's going to change throughout our lives. It's going to evolve and be different things. But I think asking yourself truly what it is that you want and truly the things that like lights you up is more often like overlooked because like, you know, everyone, we like, there's one version of success, or like everyone else is doing this other thing, and just kind of like what our parents want or what our friends want, what our friends think. But make that space for yourself to think about what it is that you want. Because if you want something and it's from a place of pureness, you can make it happen.
Wow. That was a strong finish. Thanks, Tina.
Thank you for having me.
There's so much wisdom packed into this last hour or so.
I was gonna say, I cannot wait for people to watch this back on YouTube. Depending on how we edit it, the amount
It's going
of
on YouTube.
the amount of times I giggled and laughed throughout your stories was absurd. There are gonna be so many, like, you're gonna be telling like a serious story, and just your delivery. I just love listening to you talk, Tina. So thank you so much for being our guest. This was great. There were so many gems, and I can't wait to hopefully see you again in person soon in a Hawaiian shirt, of course.
Yeah. Next time I'm going to be in New York, it's going to be winter. So I don't think I'm going to be in a Hawaiian shirt.
Understood. Okay. Well, next time.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me on this pod. Hopefully it was somewhat helpful for folks who are listening.
I'm sure it was. Thank you.